Have you ever encountered a situation where a small child said something so profound that you were left speechless? A reflection so mature that it seemed to come from someone with decades of life experience? This is the story of Courtney, a little girl who at just a few years old demonstrated wisdom about life and death that impressed even experienced researchers. Carol Bowman, one of the world's leading experts on childhood reincarnation, never imagined that it would be in her own home, with her own daughter, that she would witness one of the most eloquent explanations about reincarnation she had ever heard. And it all started with an apparently simple question in the kitchen at home. The Bowman family wasn't exactly what you'd expect from reincarnation scholars. They attended a Presbyterian church and considered themselves quite traditional people. Carol was still in the early stages of her research on past life memories in children, and Steve, her husband, maintained a healthy skepticism about the subject. It was an ordinary afternoon when something extraordinary happened. Carol was in the kitchen preparing dinner, immersed in her thoughts about the cases she had been studying when Courtney approached. The little girl, with her childlike naturalness, asked a question that caught her mother completely off guard. "Mom, why do people get sad when someone dies?" The question came out of nowhere, without any context that would justify such a profound reflection. Carol stopped what she was doing and looked at her daughter, trying to formulate an appropriate answer for such a young child. But before she could respond, Courtney continued, "I don't understand why they get sad. The person who died isn't really dead, is she?" The words came out with a conviction that didn't match her age. It was as if she were explaining something obvious to someone who hadn't yet understood a fundamental truth. Carol felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a typical child's question. There was something about the way Courtney formulated her questions, a depth that went far beyond what you'd expect from someone so young. The little girl continued, walking through the kitchen with the ease of someone who was completely comfortable with the subject. When someone dies, they just leave their body behind. It's like taking off old clothes. The person continues to exist, just in another place. Carol was paralyzed. Where did that explanation come from? They attended a traditional Presbyterian church, where concepts about reincarnation were never addressed. Carol herself was just beginning her studies on the subject, and she certainly had never discussed these ideas with the children at home. "Courtney, dear," Carol managed to articulate, "where did you get that idea?" The little girl looked at her with those penetrating eyes, as if her mother's question was unnecessary. "I just know, Mom. I've always known." And she continued walking through the kitchen, spinning like an ordinary child, but carrying wisdom that defied all logic. Carol tried to process what she had just heard. As a therapist and researcher, she knew child cognitive development. She knew exactly what to expect from a child at that age. And what Courtney was saying was far beyond what any developmental theory could explain. But Courtney wasn't finished. With the naturalness of someone discussing the weather, she continued her explanation. "You know, Mom, when a person does many bad things in one life, they can get very tired trying to fix everything in the same existence." Carol felt her legs weaken. Where would a child learn about karma, about the consequences of actions across lives? She leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to maintain her composure while listening to her little daughter. "That's why sometimes it's better to start all over again," Courtney continued, as if she were explaining why we sometimes need to change clothes. When the person dies, they can be born as a baby in a new family, without carrying all those heavy things from the past. The little girl stopped walking and looked directly at her mother. "You see, Mom, it's much better for them, because they won't waste energy trying to fix things that are too difficult to fix. They can learn what they need to learn much more easily if they start over." Carol realized she was holding her breath. Courtney's words echoed knowledge that she herself was just beginning to study in specialized books, in Eastern philosophy texts, in complex academic research. "And you know why people get sad?" Courtney asked rhetorically, tilting her head as children do when they want to make sure they're being understood. "They get sad because they don't understand this. If they understood, they wouldn't be sad." There was something about the way she said "they" that made Carol realize Courtney didn't include herself in that group of people who didn't comprehend. For her, this was a truth as evident as the fact that the sun rises every day. The little girl took a few more steps through the kitchen, playing with a wooden spoon she found on the counter, but her voice maintained that disconcerting seriousness. "The person who died will be fine, Mom. They're going to start a new adventure." Carol finally managed to find her voice. "But Courtney, where do you know all this from? We've never talked about these things in our family." Courtney smiled. In that way children smile when adults ask silly questions. "I don't need someone to tell me, Mom. I remember." And before Carol could ask what she remembered, Courtney added, "Some things you just know from inside." Tidis? At that moment, Carol Bowman understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary. It wasn't just a precocious or imaginative child, it was an old soul in a young body, sharing knowledge that transcended any conventional learning. What happened next left Carol even more perplexed. Courtney stopped playing with the spoon and turned to her mother with an expression that mixed compassion and a hint of impatience, as if she were dealing with someone who insisted on not understanding something fundamental. "Mom," she said, with a patience that shouldn't exist in such a small child, "you're thinking about someone who died, aren't you?" The question was so precise that Carol felt a lump in her throat. How could Courtney know? In fact, Carol was indeed thinking about specific cases she had been studying. Families devastated by the loss of loved ones, people who struggled to find meaning in the premature death of children, husbands, wives. It was exactly about this that she was reflecting when Courtney started that impromptu conversation. "People suffer because they think they've lost forever those they loved," Courtney continued, and now her voice carried a tenderness that contrasted with the depth of her words. "But they haven't lost anything. The person continues to exist, just in another place." Carol realized she was trembling slightly. How could she explain to her fellow researchers that her own daughter, raised in a traditional Presbyterian home, was articulating concepts about the continuity of the soul that philosophers took centuries to develop? "Courtney, do you remember being another person before?" Carol asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the storm of emotions she felt inside. The little girl thought for a moment, biting her lower lip as children do when they're concentrating. "Not exactly, Mom. Not like you remember yesterday or last week. It's different." She paused, looking for the right words. "It's like when you know you've been to a place before, but you can't remember when or with whom." The analogy was perfect. Carol knew that feeling of déjà vu, and the way Courtney described it showed an intuitive understanding of how memories work between lives. "But I know I've lived before," Courtney stated with conviction. "And I know I'll live again. Everyone lives many times, Mom. That's how we learn." The most impressive thing wasn't just the words, but the naturalness with which she pronounced them. For Courtney, talking about reincarnation was as normal as commenting on what she had learned at school or what game she wanted to play at the park. "And you're not afraid of death?" Carol asked, genuinely curious about how a child processed a concept that terrified so many adults. Courtney laughed, and for a moment she was just an ordinary child again. "Why would I be afraid, Mom? It's just like going to sleep and waking up in a new place. Sometimes you wake up in the same house, sometimes in a different house. But you always wake up." Carol had to sit down. The simplicity of the explanation was brilliant. Courtney had found a perfect metaphor to describe the process of death and rebirth, one that even a small child could understand. "Do you want to know something?" Courtney asked, approaching her mother with that mischievous smile that all children have when they're about to tell a secret. Carol nodded, unable to imagine what would come next. "Sometimes," Courtney whispered, as if she were telling the world's biggest secret, "I think you're younger than me." The statement came accompanied by a genuine giggle, but her eyes maintained that disconcerting depth. Carol felt a chill down her spine. There was something about the way Courtney said that which didn't sound like childish play. It was as if she really believed that her soul carried more experiences than her own mother's. "What do you mean by that, dear?" Carol asked, trying to maintain a casual tone, although inside she felt she was about to hear something that would forever change her perception of her own daughter. Courtney settled next to her mother, swinging her legs as children do when they're sitting in chairs too high for them. "You still worry too much about things that aren't so important, Mom. As if this life were the only one you're going to have." The observation was so accurate that Carol was speechless. It was true. Despite studying reincarnation, she still struggled daily with anxieties, fears, and worries that consumed her energy. And there was her little daughter, gently pointing to one of the deepest aspects of spiritual wisdom, the importance of maintaining perspective. "But don't be sad about that," Courtney quickly added, noticing that maybe she had sounded too serious. "Everyone learns at their own pace. Some people need more lives to understand certain things. That's okay." The compassion in Courtney's words was genuine, but there was also an emotional maturity there that left Carol deeply touched. How could such a small child demonstrate such understanding about the process of spiritual evolution? "Courtney, when you think about these things, do you feel different from other children?" Carol asked, worried that her daughter might feel isolated or misunderstood. The little girl thought for a moment, biting her lower lip again. "Sometimes, yes," she admitted. "But it's not a bad thing. It's like knowing how to speak another language that most people don't speak. You don't get sad for knowing. You just wait to find other people who also know." The analogy was brilliant. Carol realized that Courtney had found a healthy way to process her difference, seeing it as a gift instead of a burden. "And have you found other people who speak this language?" Carol asked, using her daughter's own words. Courtney smiled widely. "You're learning, Mom. That's why I can talk to you about this." She gave her mother a quick hug and jumped from the chair. "But now I want to play with my toys. Talking about serious things gets a little tiring." And so, with the same naturalness with which she had started that extraordinary conversation, Courtney went back to being an ordinary child, running to her room in search of her dolls and games. She left Carol alone in the kitchen, trying to process everything she had just heard. Carol looked around the familiar kitchen, the same environment where minutes before she was simply preparing dinner. Now, everything seemed different. It was as if Courtney had opened a window to a world of possibilities that Carol, despite all her study and research, was still just beginning to understand. At that moment, she knew she needed to document every word of that conversation. Not just for her research, but because she had just witnessed one of the purest examples of innate wisdom she had ever encountered. When Steve arrived home that night, he found Carol still sitting in the same kitchen chair, with a notebook in her hands, writing furiously. She had spent hours trying to capture every nuance of that extraordinary conversation with Courtney. "You won't believe what happened today," Carol said, before Steve even had time to greet her. "Courtney, she said things that... Steve, it took me 3 hours to fully process everything she explained." Steve knew his wife well. He knew Carol wasn't given to exaggerations, especially when it came to her work. If she was so impacted, something really extraordinary had happened. "Tell me," he said, sitting next to her, noticing the mixture of amazement and emotion on Carol's face. While Carol related the conversation, Steve listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. He knew Courtney better than anyone. He knew exactly what her references were, what she had learned at school, at church, with friends, and none of that explained where those profound reflections came from. "Did she really say all that?" Steve asked when Carol finished telling. "About starting over? About not wasting energy? About people getting sad because they don't understand?" Carol showed the notes she had made. "Every word, Steve. And it wasn't like she was repeating something she heard somewhere. It was as if she were accessing knowledge that already existed within her." At that moment, they heard small footsteps coming down the stairs. Courtney appeared in the kitchen, already wearing her pajamas, carrying her toothbrush. "Dad!" she shouted cheerfully, running into Steve's arms. "You're home! Did Mom tell you about our conversation?" Steve looked at his daughter, trying to see beyond the appearance of an ordinary child. "She told me some things. Do you really believe everything you said to her?" Courtney nodded with conviction. "Of course, Dad. Why would I say things I don't believe?" The simplicity of the answer was disconcerting. For her, lying about something so important would be unthinkable. "And where do you think this knowledge comes from?" Steve asked, genuinely curious. Courtney thought for a moment, as if she were trying to find a way to explain something very complex to someone who didn't yet have the foundations to fully understand. "You know when you wake up in the morning and just know what day of the week it is, Dad? You don't have to think much. You just know. That's how it is with me and these things about life." She shrugged, as if the explanation were obvious. "It's just that some people forgot how to know these things." Steve and Carol exchanged glances. The ease with which Courtney dealt with such complex concepts was impressive. But what touched them most was her naturalness. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or draw attention. For her, that knowledge was as natural as knowing her own name. "Courtney," Carol said gently, "do you feel good sharing these ideas with us?" "I feel happy, Mom. It's good to be able to talk about this with someone who won't think I'm strange." She climbed onto the chair next to her father. "Some people think it's strange when children know things they don't know. But you understand." The answer revealed remarkable emotional maturity. Courtney had already learned to discern with whom she could be completely open about her perceptions, demonstrating a social wisdom that went far beyond her chronological age. That night, as they tucked Courtney into bed, Carol and Steve realized that their family had changed forever. They were no longer just parents of a special child. They were guardians of an old soul who had chosen to come through them to share ancient wisdom with the world. The simplicity of the request exposed the emptiness of the psychologist's evasive answers. Courtney had demonstrated that sometimes the deepest questions require not academic complexity, but clarity of thought and emotional honesty. After the conference, while walking through the parking lot, Carol was still processing what she had witnessed. Her daughter, of just a few years, had just defended complex spiritual concepts in front of an audience of skeptical adults, using logic so simple and clear that it had left even the harshest critics without an answer. "Courtney," Carol said, stopping and kneeling to be at her daughter's height. "Weren't you nervous speaking in front of all those people?" Courtney shook her head. "Why would I be nervous, Mom? I was just talking about things I know are true. It's like telling someone what color the sky is. You don't get nervous to say the sky is blue, do you?" The comparison was typical of Courtney, transforming something that seemed extraordinary into something completely natural and logical. But The doctor didn't agree with you, Steve observed. How do you feel when people don't believe what you know is true? Courtney thought for a moment, walking between her parents while swinging their hands. I don't get angry or sad, Dad. Some people aren't ready to understand certain things yet. It's like trying to teach a 2-year-old to drive a car. It's not that they're stupid. They just haven't grown up enough yet. Carol was impressed with the emotional maturity of the response. Courtney had found a way to maintain compassion for those who disagreed with her, seeing the difference in perspective as a matter of development instead of personal confrontation. And do you think that doctor will understand someday? Carol asked, curious about how Courtney perceived the potential for change in people. Everyone understands in the end, Courtney responded with conviction. Some people understand when they're children, others when they get old, others after they die. But everyone understands in the end. The answer carried a cosmic patience that left Carol deeply touched. Courtney not only possessed advanced knowledge about reincarnation, but had developed a long-term perspective on the evolution of human consciousness. Courtney, Steve said softly, do you sometimes feel it's your responsibility to teach these things to people? The little girl stopped walking and looked at her father with a serious expression. It's not my responsibility to teach, Dad. It's my responsibility to be an example. When you live knowing these things, people notice you're different. And then, if they ask, you can explain. Carol realized that Courtney had articulated one of the most important lessons about spiritual leadership: influence through example instead of preaching. But sometimes, Courtney added, with that mischievous smile that always appeared when she was about to reveal something special, it's fun to ask questions that make people think. Like I did with the doctor. The observation revealed that Courtney perfectly understood the strategy she had used at the conference. She had consciously chosen to ask questions instead of giving lectures, allowing the very logic of the questions to reveal the limitations of skeptical positions. At that moment, Carol understood that her daughter wasn't just a child with past life memories or intuitive knowledge about reincarnation. Courtney was a master soul who had chosen to come through her family to demonstrate how spiritual wisdom could be lived naturally, compassionately, and effectively in the modern world. A few weeks after that memorable conversation in the kitchen, Courtney surprised her parents again with an even deeper reflection. This time, the family was watching a movie that showed a character dealing with the consequences of bad decisions he had made in the past. Carol noticed that Courtney was observing the screen with unusual intensity, as if she were processing something much more complex than the simple story being told. Mom, Courtney said during a particularly dramatic scene, that man is carrying many heavy things from before, isn't he? The observation caught Carol by surprise. The movie didn't explicitly mention concepts like karma or consequences from past lives, but Courtney was clearly seeing connections that escaped the superficial narrative. What do you mean, dear? Carol asked, pausing the movie and turning to her daughter. Courtney frowned, concentrating to find the right words. He's trying to fix things he did wrong a long time ago. But some of those things are from before being born this time. Steve, who was listening to the conversation, felt that familiar chill that always accompanied Courtney's profound reflections. How can you know this, Courtney? It's like when you break a toy and try to glue it, she explained, using an analogy that made sense to her. Sometimes you can fix it well. Sometimes it stays a little crooked. And sometimes you need to wait to get older to have enough skill to fix it right. The simplicity of the explanation contrasted with the depth of the concept she was transmitting. Courtney was describing how souls deal with unlearned lessons and actions that need to be balanced across multiple existences. So you think people come back to learn specific things? Carol asked, curious to understand how far her daughter's comprehension of these spiritual mechanisms went. Not exactly learn, Courtney gently corrected. It's more like remembering. Remembering to be a good person, to be kind, not to hurt others. She paused, biting her lip as she always did when thinking about something complex. You know when you're playing and forget to share toys, and then Mom reminds you that you should share? It's like that. Only sometimes you need many lives to remember completely. Carol was impressed with the naturalness with which Courtney integrated complex spiritual concepts into analogies that any child could understand. It was as if she possessed an innate gift for translating ancient wisdom into accessible language. "And do you remember things you need to learn in this life?" Steve asked, moved by genuine curiosity about his daughter's inner experience. Courtney smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Steve had learned to recognize as a sign that she was accessing something very deep. "I know I need to learn to have patience with people who don't understand certain things yet," she said, with disconcerting honesty. "Sometimes I get impatient when someone can't see what's so clear to me." The answer revealed not only self-awareness, but also a mature understanding of the challenges of her own spiritual journey. Courtney recognized her own areas of growth with a humility that was simultaneously touching and impressive. What impressed Carol and Steve most wasn't just Courtney's profound words, but the way she applied this wisdom in everyday situations. On one occasion, when the family was visiting Courtney's grandmother, who was going through a difficult period after the death of a close friend, the little girl demonstrated compassion and understanding that left everyone moved. The grandmother was clearly downcast, lost in memories and tears, when Courtney approached her with careful steps. Without saying a word, she climbed into her grandmother's lap and simply stayed there, offering her presence as comfort. "Grandma," she said, after a few minutes of comfortable silence, "you know your friend didn't really go away, don't you?" The grandmother looked at Courtney with surprise. "What do you mean, dear?" "People we love continue to exist, just in a different place. It's like when you move houses, but you're still the same person." Courtney spoke with a tenderness that shouldn't exist in such a small child. "Your friend is fine, Grandma. She's just in a new house now. And one day, when it's the right time, you'll visit her in that new house." The grandmother's tears changed from sadness to a kind of relief mixed with amazement. How could such a small child offer such consolation? "But I miss her so much," the grandmother whispered, hugging Courtney tighter. "It's normal to miss her, Grandma. It means you loved each other very much. But you don't need to worry about her. She's happy where she is now." Courtney paused, as if she were listening to something only she could perceive. "She wants you to know that everything is okay." Later that night, when they were driving home, Carol asked Courtney how she knew what to say to comfort her grandmother. "I didn't know exactly what to say," Courtney admitted, "but I could feel that Grandma needed to know there was nothing to worry about. Sometimes, when people are very sad, they forget things they know deep in their hearts." The observation was deeply insightful. Courtney had identified that her grandmother's suffering came not just from missing her friend, but from uncertainty and fear about her deceased friend's well-being. "Do you really believe you can feel these things?" Steve asked, trying to understand the extent of his daughter's intuitive abilities. "It's not that I believe, Dad. It's like feeling when someone is hungry or sleepy. You don't need to believe, you just feel." Courtney explained with that naturalness that had become her trademark when talking about spiritual matters. Carol realized that Courtney not only possessed intuitive knowledge about reincarnation and continuity of life after death, but also had developed empathic sensitivity that allowed her to perceive the emotional needs of people around her. "Courtney," Carol said gently, "do you feel responsible for helping people who are sad?" The little girl thought carefully before answering. "Not responsible like it's my obligation, but when I can help someone remember something important they forgot, I want to help." She smiled. "It's like when you see someone looking for glasses that are on top of their head. You're going to tell them, aren't you?" The analogy was perfect and revealed a mature understanding of the balance between compassion and personal responsibility. Courtney understood that she could offer perspective and comfort without carrying the emotional weight of others. That night, Carol reflected on how her daughter had become not just a subject of study for her reincarnation research, but also a teacher who was expanding her own understanding of the nature of the soul and the continuity of consciousness. The true test of Courtney's wisdom came when the family participated in a reincarnation conference where Carol had been invited to speak. During the question and answer period, a psychologist in the audience harshly questioned the validity of past life memory cases in children, suggesting that it was all nothing more than childish fantasy fed by gullible parents. The criticism was specifically directed at Carol's work, and the situation became embarrassing when the psychologist, identified as Dr. Isabel, began using complex technical terms to discredit reincarnation reports, completely ignoring the therapeutic aspects and documented healings. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Sarah, Courtney's older sister, who was present at the conference, raised her hand and responded eloquently, mentioning how her own experience with past life memories had cured specific fears she had. But Dr. Isabel continued her skepticism, using pompous words without offering convincing alternative explanations. The tension in the auditorium was palpable. It was at this moment that Courtney, who had been sitting quietly next to her parents, asked permission to speak. Carol hesitated for a moment, worried about exposing her little daughter to a potentially hostile environment. But something in Courtney's determined look convinced her. "Can I ask the doctor a question?" Courtney said, her voice clear and calm, echoing through the silent auditorium. Dr. Isabel seemed surprised that such a small child wanted to participate in the debate, but agreed condescendingly. "Doctor," Courtney began, with a politeness that impressed everyone, "if a person does very bad things in one life, but then dies, what happens to all those bad things they did?" The question caught the psychologist off guard. It was a profound philosophical question, formulated with the simplicity of a child, but which went straight to the heart of fundamental questions about justice, consequences, and spiritual evolution. "Well," Dr. Isabel began, visibly uncomfortable, "that's a complex question." But Courtney continued, with that characteristic patience, "Because if the person simply stops existing when they die, then the bad things they did are never fixed, right? And that wouldn't be fair to those who were hurt." The auditorium was completely silent. A child of just a few years had just articulated one of the most fundamental arguments in favor of soul continuity and cosmic justice. "But," Courtney continued, "if the person continues to exist and can come back, then they have the chance to fix what they did wrong. And that's much better for everyone, because it means no one is left without justice forever." Dr. Isabel tried to respond with more technical jargon, but Courtney gently interrupted her. "Doctor, I didn't understand those difficult words. Can you explain in a simpler way?" The simplicity of the request exposed the emptiness of the psychologist's evasive answers. Courtney had demonstrated that sometimes the deepest questions require not academic complexity, but clarity of thought and emotional honesty. After the conference, while walking through the parking lot, Carol was still processing what she had witnessed. Her daughter, of just a few years, had just defended complex spiritual concepts in front of an audience of skeptical adults, using logic so simple and clear that it had left even the harshest critics without an answer. "Courtney," Carol said, stopping and kneeling to be at her daughter's height. "Weren't you nervous speaking in front of all those people?" Courtney shook her head. "Why would I be nervous, Mom? I was just talking about things I know are true. It's like telling someone what color the sky is. You don't get nervous to say the sky is blue, do you?" The comparison was typical of Courtney, transforming something that seemed extraordinary into something completely natural and logical. "But the doctor didn't agree with you," Steve observed. "How do you feel when people don't believe what you know is true?" Courtney thought for a moment, walking between her parents while swinging their hands. "I don't get angry or sad, Dad. Some people aren't ready to understand certain things yet. It's like trying to teach a 2-year-old to drive a car. It's not that they're stupid. They just haven't grown up enough yet." Carol was impressed with the emotional maturity of the response. Courtney had found a way to maintain compassion for those who disagreed with her, seeing the difference in perspective as a matter of development instead of personal confrontation. "And do you think that doctor will understand someday?" Carol asked, curious about how Courtney perceived the potential for change in people. "Everyone understands in the end," Courtney responded with conviction. "Some people understand when they're children, others when they get old, others after they die. But everyone understands in the end." The answer carried a cosmic patience that left Carol deeply touched. Courtney not only possessed advanced knowledge about reincarnation, but had developed a long-term perspective on the evolution of human consciousness. "Courtney," Steve said softly, "do you sometimes feel it's your responsibility to teach these things to people?" The little girl stopped walking and looked at her father with a serious expression. "It's not my responsibility to teach, Dad. It's my responsibility to be an example. When you live knowing these things, people notice you're different. And then, if they ask, you can explain." Carol realized that Courtney had articulated one of the most important lessons about spiritual leadership: influence through example instead of preaching. "But sometimes," Courtney added with that mischievous smile that always appeared when she was about to reveal something special, "it's fun to ask questions that make people think. Like I did with the doctor." The observation revealed that Courtney perfectly understood the strategy she had used at the conference. She had consciously chosen to ask questions instead of giving lectures, allowing the very logic of the questions to reveal the limitations of skeptical positions. At that moment, Carol understood that her daughter wasn't just a child with past life memories or intuitive knowledge about reincarnation. Courtney was a master soul who had chosen to come through her family to demonstrate how spiritual wisdom could be lived naturally, compassionately, and effectively in the modern world. Years have passed since those first extraordinary encounters with Courtney's wisdom. As Carol documented in her books, the specific past life memories eventually disappeared, as happens with most children. But something much more valuable remained. Courtney grew up maintaining that unique perspective on life and death, that natural compassion for others, and especially that ability to see beyond superficial appearances. She developed as a creative, curious, and emotionally mature teenager, qualities that Carol attributes directly to her childhood spiritual experiences. What this experience taught us, Carol reflects today, is that wisdom isn't a privilege of age or formal education. Sometimes it comes through small children who carry ancient knowledge in new hearts. Courtney's influence extended far beyond her own family. Her words, documented in Carol Bowman's books, have touched thousands of people around the world. Parents who had lost children found comfort in her explanations about life's continuity. Researchers found new inspiration in her ability to articulate complex concepts with crystalline simplicity. But perhaps Courtney's most important legacy has been demonstrating that spiritual wisdom and everyday life don't need to be separated. She showed that it's possible to carry profound knowledge about the nature of the soul and reincarnation while remaining a normal, playful, and loving child. Courtney taught us that children can be our most important teachers, Carol often says in her lectures. They come to us without the filters and prejudices we develop as adults. When we encounter a child like Courtney, who maintained access to ancient wisdom, we have the opportunity to learn not just about reincarnation, but about how to live more consciously and compassionately. Courtney's story also demonstrates the importance of parents who are willing to truly listen to their children. If Carol and Steve had dismissed Courtney's profound observations as mere childish fantasy, the world would have lost some of the clearest and most touching explanations about reincarnation ever recorded. This extraordinary story of Courtney is documented in Carol Bowman's books Children's Past Lives and Return from Heaven, works that have become worldwide references in the study of childhood reincarnation. Carol Bowman is a therapist specializing in past life regression and one of the world's leading authorities on the subject, having her work presented on shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, and various documentaries. Courtney's wisdom teaches us that sometimes the deepest truths come to us through the youngest voices, carried with a purity and clarity that we adults often lose along the way. If this story touched your heart and sparked your curiosity about the mysteries of reincarnation, leave your like so we can continue bringing these real and documented cases. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of the extraordinary stories we share here. In the comments, tell us, have you ever witnessed a situation where a child demonstrated wisdom beyond their age? How would you react if you were the parent of a child like Courtney? Your experiences and reflections enrich our community and help us better understand these mysteries of existence. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope and life's continuity, share this video. Together, we continue exploring the profound mysteries of human existence, always with the respect and seriousness these themes deserve, inspired by the simple and profound wisdom of children like Courtney, who show us that death is just a transition, and that love and learning continue through all lives.